So this week has been a kind of an interesting week. Have you ever wanted to just redo, have like a whole redo of a week? You just can't gain traction, you can't really do much, and it kind of was a week. So this week, let me tell you about how it started. So last Friday, before Labor Day, I took Mindy and the family down to Waco to see her family. And I drove back up Saturday, I preached Sunday, and I decided to go back on Sunday afternoon. So I was driving to Waco. It's 108 miles. We've driven that so many times now, it's second nature. But in Canton, my battery light came on in the van. And so, as any good guy should do, I just kept driving. I said, I'm pretty sure I can make it. I got about an hour and a half. I'm pretty sure I can do it. And then some things started to happen as I started to drive. I started to see different lights on the dash just started to light up, different things. What really scared me was the airbag light came on. I thought, if the airbag comes on at me when I'm going 75, this might not turn out real well. But I kept thinking, I just have a little bit further to make it. As I started to think about this isn't in your notes, this is just for free. But as I started to think about this, how many times in our faith, in our walk of faith with Christ, are we literally, we're just at zero. Our batteries are drained. We've got no fuel in the tank. We're just barely inching along. And we do this, we're just thinking, man, if I just make it to the next stop, if I can just keep going. Well, I was going to just try to make it, push it as far as I could. I hit a little town called Dawson. I don't know if you've ever been through Dawson on the way to Waco or if you're going down to College Station. So I hit this little town called Dawson, and all of a sudden, all my gauges turned off. So I had no speedometer. I had no idea how fast I was going. And you think you could tell, you guys who drive, you're like, I could probably, kind of just think about how fast you have no idea. I'm like, I could be going 80, I could be going 30. I have no idea. I had no fuel gauge. I had no idea how much fuel was in there. The other gauges don't matter, right, guys? Who are car guys, the other ones don't do anything, so it doesn't matter. But so I lost all that, and I thought, you know what? I don't think I can go any further. I'm pretty sure this is the limit. So I stopped in a little town called Hubbard, and there's one stoplight in the town. I stopped at that stoplight, and then when I tried to push the gas, it went and it started chugging on me. And so I pulled over into a parking lot, the first parking lot I saw, and the van died completely. Now, how many people wake up and the first thing out of their mind, the first thing out of their mouth is, I really hope my car breaks down today. I could really use a mechanic's bill. I could really just use the patience that you glean from your car just absolutely stopping. Well, it ended up being my alternator, so it's not the worst thing that could have happened, but it's definitely not something I would wish on anybody. But as I went through this, I'm going to tell this story for a purpose. Because as I went through all this, I could see the hand of God and His power and His goodness running through this story. And you're like, I'm not sure I'm going to get there with you, Pastor, because this doesn't seem like a good story. But listen, I could have broken down in the middle of nowhere. You guys who have driven that road know that there are stretches of absolutely nothing. No people, nothing around. I could have stopped there and I would have had to hitchhike the rest of the way. I gotta tell you, if I stick my leg out on the road, that's not going to stop any cars. So I was like, what would have happened? And guess the place that I stopped, the parking lot that I happened to stop in, was a mechanic shop. So that kind of was the first clue that maybe God is doing something here. This was a Sunday afternoon, and so I thought, it's Labor Day weekend, I'm going to have to wait until Tuesday to talk to anybody. But lo and behold, the door of the mechanic shop opened, and the mechanic was there. He was getting his keys. He had left his keys there. He was about to go out of town on a trip, and he said, I saw you break down. Are you okay? And so we checked a couple of things and scheduled it for Tuesday morning to get fixed. He shouldn't have been there, right? He should have been away on vacation with his family. But I look at all these things. It all boils down to one thing, that God takes sometimes the terrible situations in our life, the times that you think, how am I ever going to get out of this? And He takes those situations and He redeems them for His purpose and for His glory. So we're going to read most of Esther chapter 2. So go with me there to Esther chapter 2. We're going to read most of the story. God is going to take 3 absolutely terrible situations, and we're going to see how He flips them around and makes them into a positive. So I'm going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read through 18 verses, and then we'll kind of break it down. I don't want to interrupt the flow of it at the beginning. So if you're there with me, I'm going to ask you to stand with me, just to give honor to God's word and the reading of God's word this evening. So what's the little caption right above this? What does your Bible call this section? Okay, the discovery of Esther. Search for a new queen. What else? Esther's chosen queen. What did you say? Esther becomes queen. Okay, so now we kind of know what we're going to be talking about here. Esther chapter 2. And I'm just going to read through this. I'm in the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible. I'm glad Wade isn't in here because we have some debates on that. I call this, he calls it the Compromise Standard Bible, and I call it Christ's Superior Bible. So, but this is my favorite personal translation. It's very easy to read, very easy to understand. That's why I go with it. It's solid and good when it comes to following those traditional languages. So let me read this. This is Esther chapter 2, and start at verse 1. It says, sometime later. Okay, now that means more than what we think. Sometime in this context means 4 years. Okay, sometime later, when King Ahasuerus, or your version might say Xerxes, when King Ahasuerus' rage had cooled down, we'll talk about that, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decided against her. So the king's personal attendants suggested, let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. We'll talk about this. It's going to be fun. It's going to be awesome. Let the king appoint commissioners in each province of his kingdom so that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem at the fortress of Susa. Put them under the supervision of Hegai. We're going to see that name a lot. I'm going to put this forward to you. It's probably not a name. It's probably a title because it means eunuch. It's probably not what you want to name your son. And so we're going to call that his title. Hegai, the king's eunuch, keeper of the women. That's a title. And give them the required beauty treatments. Verse 4. Then the young woman who pleases the king will become queen instead of Vashti. So this suggestion pleased the king. Of course it did. And he did accordingly. I'm adding stuff. I hope you see that. I'm not trying to add to the Bible. I'm just making comments as I go. Verse 5. In the fortress of Susa, there was a Jewish man named Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite. He had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the other captives when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon took Jeconiah of Judah into exile. Mordecai was the legal guardian of his cousin Hadassah. That's also known as Esther, because she had no father or mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was extremely good looking. We'll talk about that. When her father and mother died, Mordecai had adopted her as his own daughter. So when the king's commanded edict became public knowledge, and when many young women were gathered at the fortress of Susa under Heggai's supervision, Esther was taken to the palace into the supervision of Hegai, keeper of the women. The young woman pleased him and gained his favor, so that he accelerated the process of the beauty treatments and the special diet that she received. He assigned 7 hand-picked female servants to her from the palace and transferred her and her servants to the harem's best quarters. Things are moving along. We'll talk about each part of this. Esther did not reveal her ethnicity or her family background. What was her ethnicity? Jewish. Okay. She did not reveal it because Mordecai had ordered her not to make them known. Every day, Mordecai took a walk in front of the harem's courtyard to learn how Esther was doing and to see what was happening to her. During the year, before each young woman's turn to go to King Ahasuerus, the harem regulation required her to receive beauty treatments with oil of myrrh for 6 months, and then with perfumes and cosmetics for another 6 months. And when the young woman would go to the king, she was given whatever she requested to take with her from the harem to the palace. She would go in the evening, and in the morning she would return to a second harem under the supervision of the king's eunuch. Here's a great name for you. Shashgaz, keeper of the concubines. And that literally is what Shashgaz also means, keeper of the concubines. So it's probably not a name either. She never went to the king again unless he desired her and summoned her by name. But Esther was the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter. And when her turn came to go to the king, she didn't ask for anything except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, keeper of the women, suggested. Esther gained favor in the eyes of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Ahasuerus in the palace in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all of the other women. She won more favor and approval from him than did any of the other virgins. He placed the royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. The king held a great banquet for all his officials and staff. It was Esther's banquet. He freed his provinces from tax payments and gave gifts worthy of the king's bounty. All right, I know that was a huge section to read. I want us to pray together, and then we'll dive in and kind of take this apart a little bit. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this topic. It's not easy to preach on. It's a little bit awkward. I pray that you would help us to see that your word touches on every topic, every issue that we have, every thing that we struggle with. You've got an answer for it. You've got a word for it. And so I pray that you would help us and give us that specific word tonight. We love you, Lord, and we give you this time to dedicate it into your name. And we ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, you be seated. Okay, so I know we read a big section out. I just want to take it apart into 3 different sections. So we meet the first guy. Who's the first guy that's mentioned here? We read a lot of names. What's the first one in chapter 2? King Ahasuerus. So let me walk me through. I know that some of the teenagers haven't been here through this series that we've done. So what's the last thing that we remember about King Ahasuerus? What's the last thing that happened? He got upset. Okay, let's walk through this timeline, because he got upset because of what? Because Vashti said no to him. So if you guys remember the story at all, this king has this big party. He gets drunk. And we know in life, and we know in Scripture, when people, no story ever starts in a positive way. Like, he got drunk and then he won the Nobel Prize. Like, things don't happen in that order. So we see this guy, he gets drunk, he commands his wife to come out and parade herself in front of everybody so they can see how beautiful she is. And she says, no way, I'm not doing that. So he gets so angry, he just gets filled with rage. He goes and he listens to some horrible advice from some people, and then he ends up casting his wife out. Like sending her effectively to a prison to live out the rest of her life. That's one day. Okay, like, that's all the worst days of our life kind of rolled into one. This is one day in the life of a psychotic megalomaniac. Right? Look all those words up, it's fun. But this is this guy, what the king, so now we read, that's the last thing that happened. Now we read the king, it starts the story sometime later when King Ahasuerus' rage had cooled down. This is 4 years later. 4 years later, what's he been doing in these 4 years? Anybody know? Yeah, exactly. So he's going to take his armies, one of the biggest armies that the world has ever seen, the Persian force of like 120,000 men. He's going to take them. He's going to take them into the land of Greece, and he is going to be utterly crushed. I mean, defeated in every sense of the word. He comes back to Greece with less than 5,000 people. So he just gets humiliated. If you guys have seen the movie or read the comics from Frank Miller called 300, like, that's what happens to him. Xerxes just gets absolutely decimated, and he comes back to his land. He's completely humiliated, and so now he's getting reminiscent. It says about him in verse 1, sometime later when King Ahasuerus' rage had cooled down. So it took him 4 years to get his mind straight. 4 years to really get in the right zone. It cooled down. Listen to this. He remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decided against her. Now, this is where I disagree with a lot of our commentators, okay? And I love these moments, because they're so much smarter than I am, and I just love disagreeing with them sometimes. But they are so generous to him. They say that he's feeling remorse and regret about what he had done to her. Okay, let's just be honest. Do you see that in the text? I'm not trying to lead you, but what I see in the text is a man who remembers what she had done, not what he had done, and remember what had been decided about her, not what he had decided about her. I think he's remembering everybody else's mistakes. He's looking and saying, now I remember what she did. I remember what decision was made. This is a man who was just absolutely selfish at the core. So let's talk about this as it opens. This is number 1 in your notes. God can turn mistakes into miracles. He can turn mistakes into miracles. So a lot of these commentators say, he was just a good guy. He's just feeling bad in this moment. I'm going to call bull on that. I think that he's looking and I think he's lonely. I think that's what's happening right now. I think he's thinking about how he used to have a wife and now he doesn't. And so that's what happened. So, and we're going to see this play out, because what's the last thing that he made, the last decision he made? Did he make it on his own? No, who compelled him or propelled him to make that decision? His advisors. Okay, so the next thing we read in chapter 2, verse 2, the king's personal attendants suggesting he's right back to it. Like, these guys have given him awful advice. And if somebody gives you the worst advice, and then you go right back to them and take more advice from them, what does that make you? Yeah, okay, wow. That's a bad word in my house. We're not allowed to say that in front of Logan. I think about it in terms of Obi-Wan Kenobi. When he looked at Luke and Han, he's like, who is more foolish, the fool or the one who follows the fool, right? And so he takes advice again, and their advice to soothe this guy's lonely heart is, let's make a search across all the kingdom for the most beautiful women, the most beautiful virgins across the whole land. You guys see what they're doing? I hope you see this. They know what happens when Ahasuerus gets mad. So when they start to see him, and he's thinking, and he's getting lonely, he's doing these things, all they're trying to do is placate him. All they're trying to do is bring him down to a level. So they suggest this thing. They suggest this beauty pageant of sorts. Let's find all the beautiful women, and then you get to choose the right one. Okay? So how does he respond this time? What does the king do? No, that's sexist. I would never do that. I would never treat women. I would never objectify women that way. Is that how he responds? No, read it to me. What does it say in verse 3? He liked it. We're going to get awkward here. I know it's going to be uncomfortable, but yeah, he's like, I like that suggestion. That's a fantastic idea. Man, thank you for thinking of that. Right? And then all these people, they're just trying to satisfy the deepest carnal desires of this man's lust. They're just trying to bring this to the front. So before this, let me see where I'm in verse 3. Let the king appoint commissioners. Let them find. Let me gather all the beautiful women. And then in verse 4, the young woman who pleases the king will be queen instead of Vashti. And this suggestion pleased the king, and he did accordingly. You know what he's living out here is Proverbs 26:11. As a dog returns to its vomit, so also a fool repeats his foolishness. He's listened to these guys before. He's going to listen to them again. This is another terrible decision. This is a huge mistake. But I want to stop just for a second and make sure we see this. He is not the main character of the story. So I don't want to dwell too much on this idiot. Right? He makes these mistakes. I want you to see something though. He makes these mistakes, but God is going to take these mistakes. He's going to take these failures. He's going to take these things and he's going to turn them into something good. And I need us to see this because sometimes we get it in our heads that if we mess up, that's the end of the line for us. If we mess up, that's it. I don't have anything else. I'm not allowed to do anything more. If I make a big mistake, then I'm going to get kicked off God's team and I can't participate anymore. That's not the way it works. God takes people who excel at making mistakes. And he redeems them for his glory. And so we're going to see him turn this around. God's power and his sovereignty are not contained inside our mistakes. We don't make a mistake and then he said, well, you ruined it all. Mark, go to your room. You're no longer the pastor. You can't do that, right? If that was the case, then the Bible would have ended in Genesis chapter 3. If God's power could be limited by our mistakes. So we're going to see God work through this. He's going to take the negative, the broken, the hurting, the useless, and he's going to redeem it for his purpose. So we're going to see what's going to happen here. So God can turn mistakes into miracles. Let's look at this next thing. God can turn tragedy into triumph. I worked so hard to find a alliterated blank. And I sat down to dinner and I assailed her with thoughts of this. So you guys, this is free. You can enjoy it. God can turn, and you're like, I don't care about that. But I do. So God can turn tragedy into triumph. At this point in the story of Esther, if this is all we had in the story of Esther, how satisfied would you be with this story? Would you be like, this is a great story. I love these characters. They really are heartwarming. This king who abuses women and just casts them out when he doesn't want them. These advisors who just play to his lust and they just do all this stuff. Aren't these just the most heartwarming characters? No, these guys are rotten. Like if this is all we had in the book of Esther, I guarantee you nobody would be preaching it in church. People are barely preaching it in churches as it is. But here we're going to see, up until this point it's been pretty bad. But here we're going to see the focus of this, the thrust of this. We're going to see the two main characters jump on the scene when all hope seems lost. His two characters are going to come on the story. What are their names? Mordecai. Man, this one should be out of this. Esther, yeah, it's the name of the book. And she finally comes on the scene. There's a preacher named A.B. Simpson, and this is what he said. God is preparing his heroes And when the opportunity comes, he will fit them in their place in a moment, and the whole world will wonder where they came from. I love that. Like, you always wonder, well, how? And where did that guy come from? And it was God preparing him all along. I believe that right now, I believe that there are people existing, whether it's in nurseries or high schools or somewhere around the world, that are going to be the next Billy Graham, or going to be the next Charles Spurgeon. I know that God is preparing men and women to stand up and do something in this world, and we're going to see that. But so we're going to meet these heroes in the story, Mordecai and Esther. Their stories are pretty tragic. When you think about the most tragic stories in life, I think they're going to rank up there. Look at this verse 5 with me. Verse 5. In the fortress of Susa, there was a Jewish man named Mordecai. Okay, stop right there. Jewish man named Mordecai. Does that mean anything to you? It shouldn't. It doesn't mean much to us. It is so weird. If you read it in Hebrew, it absolutely doesn't make sense. I'm not going to try to be racist, but here's what it would sound like. There was an Asian man named Carlos. Like, does that fit? You're like, Asian and Carlos, that doesn't fit. Jewish and Mordecai. Mordecai is not a Jewish name, it's a Persian name. And so already we see the seeds of something wrong going on. There was a Jewish man, but he did not have a Jewish name. Why didn't he have a Jewish name? Yeah, definitely. Why was this Jewish man in a non-Jewish place? Look at verse 6. Somebody read verse 6 out for me. He was carried away into captivity. His family was, at least it happened over 100 years before, so he wouldn't have been that old. But his family was carried away. So literally one day, you're lived in van. And then the next day, an army comes through, puts you on trucks, and takes you to another country. They say, Braden, your name is no longer Braden. It's Shashgaz. Okay? That's what you're called for the rest of your life. You've got to live under these customs, different language, different gods to worship, different people around you, different currency. What are we feeling in this moment? Like they're taking everything from these guys. Exile was like the biggest humiliation that these people could face. They had stripped their identity from them. So this Jewish man named Mordecai, he's in this place, he's been there, he's been kidnapped, and there really is not a whole lot of hope of ever returning. That's a terrible, tragic story, but it's not the worst that we're going to read here, because his cousin takes the cake. His cousin's name is what? Esther. What's her other name? Hadassah. We're given two names. We're given her Jewish name Hadassah, which means myrtle. It's like a little flowering tree, a myrtle tree. And then her name, her Persian name is Esther, which means star. So she had her name stripped from her as well. We meet this character, but something bigger and worse happened to her at an early age. What was that?
Parents died.
Her parents died. It says in verse 7, Mordecai was the legal guardian of his cousin Hadassah, that's Esther, because she had no father or mother. So she was strikingly beautiful. The Bible goes out of its way to describe her beauty, not in terms of just her face, but in terms of the whole package. She had everything. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was extremely good looking. When her father and mother died, Mordecai had adopted her as her own daughter. Think of this. Not only had she been stripped from her family, taken away into exile, but now also the only people in the world who loved her were dead. Like this story, this is like the beginning of a Disney movie, right? Just like everything bad is happening to this family. And that's not even the worst thing that's going to happen. The worst thing that's going to happen is after this, now this king gives this horrible decree that all these beautiful women are going to come into his palace. And guess what? They don't have a choice. And so she's taken, again, she was taken from her home, and now she's taken from her home and put in the palace. The only person that loves her in this entire world is Mordecai. And it says in verse 11 that he goes every day Mordecai took a walk in front of the harem's courtyard to learn how Esther was doing and to see what was happening to her. He was desperate just to find out if she was still alive. Are you still there? Are you doing okay? Do you have everything that you need? This is a tragedy. We kind of read through this and we get to the good part when she becomes queen. But we got to see what brought her to this place. This is an awful situation. Her family was exiled. She was an orphan. She had been taken from her home, and now she had lost everything. But listen again, this is not about her, okay? Even though her name is on the title of the book, this isn't Esther's story. Whose story is this? It's God's story. What's unique about this book, though, among all the other books of the Bible? God's name isn't even there. His name is nowhere mentioned in this book, but you see him behind the scenes. You see him everywhere in every part of the story. I said it like this at the beginning. I don't think you guys were here in the beginning, but Have you ever lined up dominoes? Like seen how many you can line up and then tipped them over and watched it? It takes like hours to put them up and then like 3 seconds to tip them all over. But this is how I view the book of Esther, is that God is putting all these things in place, all these people, all these events, because he's in charge of what's happening here in this story. And so as we look at this story, yes, it's a tragedy. God is going to take this tragedy and he's going to use it for his will. He's going to use it to create something incredible because, yes, Mordecai was in exile, but Mordecai was exactly where he needed to be. God needed Mordecai in Persia more than Mordecai needed to be back in Israel. And Esther needed to be there. She needed to be the one that could be taken into the palace. This is our sovereign God. Listen to this, all right? Something triumphant that he would raise. Tell me about Esther. All right, was she wealthy? Did she have high status? Did she have anything to her name? Was she famous? Was she anybody that you would notice on the street? Well, maybe if she was so beautiful that all the guys would. There was awesome, right? But as you look at this story, she had nothing. God raised her from the absolute lowliest place to the absolute heights of the kingdom. And we see this in our story as well. As we are apart from Christ, outside of Christ Jesus, we're beggars. We're sinners. We're lost and broken in our sin. And the book of Ephesians chapter 2 says, he raises us up with Christ and seats us with him in the heavens in Christ Jesus. So this is our story, that God would raise lowly people up to the heights. And so God is going to take this tragedy and turn it into triumph. Now this last part, this is where we're going to hit it in the last couple minutes here. God can turn suffering into celebration. And I know those aren't the same letters, but it's alliteration all the same. God can turn suffering into celebration. Now, this is the part I really wanted to focus on tonight. As you study through, as you listen to people teach on Esther and read through this story, how many of you guys have seen the VeggieTales version of Esther? Okay, like 3. Oh, awesome. So I'm going to explain it, okay? So this is how it's usually taught. That all these beautiful women just line up in front of King Ahasuerus, and he just walks down the line, looks at their faces, and looks, and he's like, that one, and that one. That's how it's portrayed, like this is some weird beauty pageant. But I really want to pull the scrolls away. I really want to just kind of dig to the ugliness of this. This is a sick and twisted thing that we're reading. Okay? This is one of the things that in the Bible, when you really see what it is, kind of makes you gasp. Look at this in verse 12. I'm going to try to be nice with this. Let's keep it PG-13. The royal scribes were summoned. No, that's chapter 3. Verse 12. During the year, before each young woman's turn to go to King Ahasuerus, the harem regulation required her to receive beauty treatments with oil of myrrh for 6 months and with perfumes and cosmetics for another 6 months. All right, it's not so bad, right? They're just giving them beauty treatment. It's like makeup camp. I don't know, can I invent that? It's a thing. They're preparing that. Effectively, what they're telling these women, though, is this: you're not good enough as you are. You've got to be prettier. You've got to be better. They talk about Esther having a special diet. They're like, you have to diet. You have to get to this perfect place of perfection. And I think we deal with this probably more than any other generation. This pursuit of girls saying, I have to attain something. Listen to me, all right? God made you the way that you are. Just embrace it. Don't try to impress people. Look at these boys around. Don't try to impress these jokers. Seriously, like, I'm not trying to dog on you guys, but I will, because listen, just don't listen. They're not worth you developing a complex over this. And this was these women. Effectively, they're treated like objects here. Like, oh, let's just go in and you got to be prettier, you got to be better, you got to be thinner, you got to be this. Just live your life. All right. And I say this to every group of teenagers I ever teach. If you ever are in a relationship with a guy and he's not right for you and you know it, and you're afraid to break up with him, I will do that for you. I'll provide that service. I will go. I've done it. I'll go and I'll call and I'll be like, it's just not working out, man. We're gonna have to go other ways. It's not happening. I will do that because you don't waste your time. Okay, so anyway, going back to this. This is the story. This is them telling these women, you're not worth it. You're not. So let's keep going in here. Verse 13. When the young women, really listen to this, all right? When the young woman would go to the king, she was given whatever she requested. to take with her from the harem to the palace. They're talking back onto that makeup. Like whatever makeup, however they want to do their hair, however they want to, what dress they want to wear, whatever it is. Okay, verse 14, she would go in the evening, and in the morning, she'd return to the second harem under the supervision of the king's eunuch. All right. Without getting graphic, you see what's happening here? This is not just people parading before the king and him picking them out. He's using them sexually. In fact, as I wrote these notes, I was looking at it, and I had never heard this before, but as I wrote in my margin on the side, is this sexual? And I started to study through it, and I wrote one word underneath it in big block letters, why he is, yes. He's using and abusing these women. They're not women to him. In fact, it says he doesn't even remember their names. And I know this is getting uncomfortable, and you guys are like, how long is this going to have to go? As long as I want it to. But he's using and abusing them. He doesn't care about them. This is just him fulfilling his lustful desires. He doesn't care about any one of these girls. And what is going to happen when they spend their night with the king? He's going to send them out to another harem where they're going to live the rest of their lives in isolation. They will never see the family. They will never go back to their homes. They make it seem in the VeggieTales like that if they didn't get chosen, they're going to go back home. No, they're never going to go back home because they've slept with the king. That means they can't. They're marked. They cannot be a part of regular society. He's casting them out the same way that he cast out Vashti in the beginning of this book. He's using them, he's abusing them, he's casting them out. He's effectively telling them, you are not good enough. Every one of these women, if you don't get called back, that means the king didn't desire you anymore. You're not good enough. You're not pretty enough, you're not beautiful enough, you're not enough. I want you guys, I just really need you to hear this. That this is what this world tries to tell you, and it's a lie. This is a horrible situation. This is suffering. This is what happens with a world that doesn't consider God. This is what the world looks like if you take God out of the equation, where you just do whatever you want to do. You hurt whoever you want to hurt. And we find these women, there may have been hundreds, potentially 1,000 women over this period of time that he slept with in his garden until he found Esther. This is awful. This is the sick, degenerate depths of what it looks like when the world doesn't consider God. But I need you to see this, because if we dwell on this until the end of days, it's just going to depress us, and we got to see the big picture. Because God uses this suffering, and he turns it into something beautiful. I need you to see this, because sometimes we look at our lives and I think, how could I ever amount to anything? Or what if I've done, we're just sitting here today, we're being honest. Like, what if I'm sitting here and I'm like, what if that was me? What if I did that? What if I was that girl or that guy who just got thrown aside? What if that's me? Then God can take your story and he can redeem it. The things that you've done, the chapter that you're in now, it's not the end of your story. We've got plenty of time left in this. But what happens out of the result of all this suffering, out of the result of all this tragedy, out of the result of these mistakes, is that Esther becomes queen. She had to be here. God was moving these pieces and orchestrating amidst the chaos of a sinful world. He was working his plan into the fabric of this place. Look at what it says about Esther, verse 15. Esther was the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter. When her turn came to go to the king, she didn't ask for anything. What does that mean? That means she didn't put any makeup on. It wasn't about the things of this world, right? She came in just as she is, and then at the end of the verse, Esther gained favor in the eyes of everyone who saw her. Verse 9 also says that she gained favor in the eyes of Hegai. And then verse 17, if you look down there, it says the king loved Esther more than all the other women. She won more favor and approval from him than any of the others did. Okay, look at this. Why did she gain favor from everybody that she was around? I'm going to be real simple, real blunt, because God willed that it happen that way. All right, that seems kind of like, oh God, you're interfering with things. Like you're in there. God doesn't make any mistakes. There has never been a time when he looked and said, oops, I wish I wouldn't have done that. Right? But he looked and he willed that it was so, because he needed Esther in the place where she was so that she could be there when Israel needed her. All right? And we're going to talk about this. This is going to be a big part of the book. It's going to culminate in chapter 4 when Esther looks and says, maybe, or Mordecai says, maybe you were born for a time like this. And I think that about you guys here and everybody in this room, that maybe God placed us where we are in the situation that you're in the family that you're in, the school that you're in, because he needed you for a specific purpose. And that's what we're going to see. She is a picture of Christ for us later on. So she's a person that God placed specially in this time and in this place to win favor from the people around her so that she could be ready to accomplish God's will. And we read this in Luke chapter 2, verse 52. Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and with people. Right? Everybody looked at Jesus and their hearts turned toward him. They crowded around him. They wanted to be near him. And ultimately, in both of those stories, they would save their people. Okay, I'm done. At the heart of all of this, what I want you to take away from this is that no matter how bad things get, God is never silent or absent. Right? He's there. He's there. You may say, he's not in my life right now. He's not answering my prayers. Well, he's not mentioned in the book of Esther either. But do we see him? He's there. He's making everything happen. He's behind the scenes. He's taking the awful things in our lives sometimes, and he's turning them into something awesome. Listen to what 1 Corinthians chapter 1 says. God chose things that are powerless, talking Esther, that are powerless to shame those who are powerful. That's the king. God chose things despised by the world, that's Mordecai, things counted as nothing at all, and used them to bring to nothing what the world considers important. God delights in using weak things and broken people and damaged people and fractured marriages and relationships, and he likes to use those things to show that it's not about us, but it's about him and his power. So what I want you to do, I want you to go home trusting that we have a God who's going to work good into your situation. He's powerful enough to do what he wants to do in our lives. And he's good enough to rescue us even out of our sin and shame. So when you look at the story of Esther, this is probably the most important part. It's an ugly chapter in the history of the world, but it's the most important chapter is this little orphan, this young orphan, that rises to the very top in order to save her people. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, I thank you, Lord, for this story. It is uncomfortable sometimes. And when we have to deal with this, Lord, it just makes me cringe sometimes. But I look and I know that this is happening in our world today. I know that women are being used and abused in human trafficking. I know that young women like Esther are being snatched every single day and being abused. I pray, Lord, because you have a heart for the downtrodden, for the hurting, for the broken, for the misunderstood, for the ones who have nothing. You have a heart for those people, Lord. And in your justice, I pray that you would make something happen. I pray that we would see the tide turn. I pray that wicked men that exist today, just like King Ahasuerus did, I pray that wicked men, Lord, I ask you that you would punish them. I ask you, Lord, that you would also, Lord, I ask you that you would use us to change hearts and lives. Yeah, we are those men. I can't ask you to break their teeth, even though I want to, because that's my story as well. I pray that you would take the worst of us, Lord, and redeem it to make it the best of you in us. I thank you for the story of Esther. I thank you that it shows us what we can have, what blessings that we can have in Christ Jesus, that we can be raised up to the heights of heaven because of what you did for us on the cross. I pray, Lord, for these teenagers in here. I pray, Lord, for them knowing what the world is going to pressure them for. It's going to pressure them to tell them that they're not good enough, they're not pretty enough, they're not talented enough, that they're not enough. But you tell us in Christ that anyone can come to you anytime. Anyone who is weary or heavy laden can come and find rest in you, that you offer the water of life freely to anybody who's thirsty. I pray that they would see their inherent value in you, that they would find their identity not in what they look like, but in whose they are, that they are children of the King, that you love them, that you got a plan for them. I pray that they would see that. I pray for the grandparents and the parents in this room, that they would see that it is our responsibility to lead the next generation to create a society that is not like this. This godless society of Persia shows us what happens when God is taken out of the equation. I pray that we would fight hard to put you back in the middle of it all. Put you in the center of our thought life, in the center of our marriages, in the center of our homes, in the center of our discipline, in the center of our schools. I pray that you would shine out so that we would see a world that is changed for the good. And we know that one day you're going to come back and you're going to make all things right. You're going to right every wrong. You're going to erase every injustice. You are going to, Lord, fix the brokenness of this place. And we ask you that you would come quickly, Lord, that you would rescue us sometimes from this tragedy that we're in. We trust you every step of the way, Jesus. We know that you are walking with us. You promise to never leave us or forsake us. You promise to stick closer than a brother to us. You promise, Lord, that where we are gathered in your name, you are there in our midst. And I know even as I pray right now, you are at the right hand of God the Father interceding on my behalf. You love us and you pray for us and you gave your life for us so that we can have new life in you. Thank you, Lord. I ask you to bless these people for taking this time out of their schedule and spending some time in the house of God. I pray that you would bless them for it. We ask all these things in the holy name of your Son, Jesus.